Hi, Anne-Sophie, Katie, Joël, Victoria, Olivier. It's good to meet you. If you can open your camera, that's good. Otherwise, I understand as well. Sometimes you're eating or whatnot. Um, I love that this is a small group for now because it means we can actually have, real discussions and that we can go into um, a lot of things. I can talk and, I guess just introduce myself first. But because this is a workshop and I want this to be as relevant as possible to you guys, I think one way to do this that would be really at least interesting to me is to hear, what is it that you want from me? And then we can go, wherever so that in that way you have, we make sure that you've got whatever it is that you wanted from this workshop. So that's the way that I wanted to do this. Um, just to introduce myself, I've been working with the media for uh, over a decade. And when I say with, I'm saying not in, because actually I used to work as a relationist for social movements. So I was on the other side. I was the communication person for feminist movement. I've been doing a lot of, press release writing, contacting journalists to get them to press conferences. So I've been doing a lot of that. I've been ghostwriting, speeches, op-eds, and then eventually those roles and those social movements led me to, instead of just being the com person for another spokesperson, realizing that I could do that myself. And so I started to have more of a public role and be, write my own quotes instead of giving them to other folks. And that gave me a role, I guess, more of a public profile, let's put it this way, especially here, around questions of, Charter of Quebec value, Islamophobia, anti-racism. Started campaign with systemic racism in Quebec in 2016. Yeah, a lot of involvement as well in the with the Quebec Federation of Women, so pushing issues around intersectionality, and as well with Black Lives Matter. So helping families of victims of police brutality to get their message out, find them lawyers for themselves, get them to, speak to the media in a way that would protect them. So all that. And I crossed over to the dark side uh, a little bit over than a year, over 2 years ago. Um, Basically, the Slav controversy happened in Quebec. So this whole issue about, you know, Robert Lepage and the Théâtre du Nouveau Monde and the Jazz Fest and all of that. And I was super frustrated that once again, this was an issue that was about us without us. Basically, a lot of folks were discussing issues that had to do with Black people, what they mean, what is their point being in Quebec, and with very little Black voices. And instead of, being on the sidelines, calling out the lack of diversity in the media, which I had done a lot in the past, actually, especially around Radio Canada and blackface and that stuff. So instead of doing that, I decided to just reach out and be like, hey, actually, I have a master in literature. I went to U of T. I actually know Canadian politics very well. I'm like this, yeah, like wonky geek, actually, with the experience that I've gained over time. So maybe I do have the profile to be an opinion writer and a columnist instead of just pushing for diversity in the media and then like waiting for some sort of Misha to come along. And Marie-André Chouinard was the very new, she was just appointed, I think, a month before that, editor-in-chief of Le Devoir, and she wrote an editorial about the Slav thing that I felt like this is a woman I could work with. She was showing actually just like sensitivity. She was not pushing issues in a way that I felt would stigmatize folks, and she was able of nuance. So I was like, if she's the new boss, I think this could be a place. And the Devoir is amazing in terms of my own profile because yeah, I'm very much like a nerd person, and Le Devoir is that place in French where you can write in a way that is, you can draw on philosophy, history, and all of that, and it's actually, part of the tone of the newspaper. And so I reached out to her, and it's kind of a case of you know, reach for the moon and land on the moon. She said she was interested, and they were looking to change the way that they do their opinion pages. And so there was a couple of months of back and forth, but eventually I started a couple of months later, at the beginning of January of 2018. And once you start to be a columnist in one media, what happens is that this gives you, you know, the title like columnist with Le Devoir, that then helps you to get on television to do those other, commentary panels. So you started to do more and more appearances on CBC television and on CTV as well, and others as like freelance political commentary. And then last fall as well, the Gazette reached out, and I was working already a lot in English in terms of radio, television. But that also gave me, I guess, a venue to be writing in English as well. Um, so yeah, so now I write every week in Le Devoir and every other week in the Gazette, and then I freelance on all of these other places. But yeah, I think it's I guess my path is a path of be the solution you're looking for. And if you see something that's missing, just be it instead of asking for it, I guess would be a way to describe how I landed there. Um, of course, because I didn't study in journalism, but actually a lot of other people didn't, and they're actually still doing that. But it's a practice. So when you're done, with in La Presse, for example, their opinion pages, you have their on staff columnists that are there full time. And then you have what they call contributors, that are, people who have like actual jobs, and they just basically, it's just a pool of people to get op-eds from really fast. As in Le Devoir, it's like they were trying to diversify their pages and get more youth as well voices in there. And so there were just a whole bunch of people who get basically to be columnists, but without having done like the traditional trade of you're a reporter and then eventually you start to do opinion writing. And so because of that, there's a kind of an adjustment, right? Because you're still, once again, there's no professional order of journalism that says that you need to have a BA in journalism to be a journalist. So when you're doing the work, you need to just do the work, although that's not your training. So I actually studied, my doctoral studies were in anthropology, and I rely a lot on that actually, especially to be able to do interviews with people coming from marginalized communities. I think there's a lot of overlap between the methodology of social science in terms of being able to do field work, to navigate the ethical dilemmas of who you're going to quote, how you're going to quote them, how you're going to protect them as you quote them, to make sure when you're trying to get on the record folks who don't have status, folks who are sex workers, folks who don't trust the media in a lot of ways, for right reasons as well, because their communities has been stigmatized by the media in the past. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the methodology you would have in an anthropology or in a sociology department, and what you can do to conduct interviews as a journalist. It really doesn't help you to do accountability interviews with the powers that be, but it really helps with, getting people who are, very suspicious of talking to the media, to get a like a trust relationship, and especially when they know your values because of the work that you've done in the past, that definitely helps as well. And of course, that network that I have because of, who I am, also helps me, pick my topics and hopefully bring some angles and some voices that would not have been necessarily there otherwise. And so yeah. And then otherwise you get training from your news organization itself to make sure that you're launched out there in a way that makes sense. I was mentored for my first 6 months by Guy Fournier, which is one of the editorialists at Le Devoir, who's been working actually in international affairs. So this guy that's traveled a lot in a lot of part of the world, who has really interesting perspectives. And so he would also like give me feedbacks on how I write, because it's also a whole new genre to do column writing. I find it very different than doing op-eds. And so we can discuss about that too. What's the difference between a column and an op-ed? But yeah, I'm grateful for that mentorship. And yeah, because even though you don't have a traditional, I guess, path, you're still hold to the same standards as everyone else. And if you do a mistake, you're gonna have the conseil de presse after you, just like everyone else. And so you need to make sure that you follow the rule and that everything, your facts are checked and verified. And actually, I lied. I'm not held to the same standard as everyone else. I'm held to a higher standard than everyone else, because I'm a Black woman who says stuff that gets a lot of people, gets under the skin of a lot of folks. And so I'm judged a lot harder, not necessarily by my editors, but just by the public. So, even though I don't make a mistake, people will try to find one, right? And so because of that lens, that's applied to my work, the need to learn on the spot and be sharp is really there. And so yeah, you need to get the I guess the mentorship for sure for the people that you're working with to be able to do that. So yeah, I'll stop there, because that gives you, I guess, an overview of all the different topics that we can go into. And I'm happy to give also just very practical tips in terms of, column writing. I find a very different style as well in terms of French and English writing. It's not just a matter of switching language. It's just opinion writing is understood in a different way. And so we can talk about that too. So yeah, I just want to hear your questions, and then I'll dig deeper into any aspects that I just mentioned.
I'd be curious to know the difference between French and English that you just talked about. It's a question I have. I didn't know there was a big difference.
I found it's a cultural difference that I found even when I did my undergrad at Université Montreal, and then I switched to U of T. I found that in academic writing as well, just the tone of things. In English, one sentence can be a paragraph. It's like very straight to the point. Here's what I want to say. Ting, 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 ting. In French, you can do that, but there's also room for like, sujet amené, sujet posé, sujet divisé, all of those stuff that would never fly in English kind of thing. So you can, yeah, I feel like there's a tone in like English speaking journalism that it needs to be a little bit more like hard hitting and straight to the point. As in like French, you can wobble a little bit more, and that's okay, because culturally that's also part of like the art of the language and stuff. So yeah, so I think you can go like this in French, and in English you need to go there and there. That's just a very like cultural, subjective perception of it, but I find that it's not just in journalism, that it's in pretty much everything. That's definitely in university language, that's in how people communicate. When we say talking points, you cannot translate that. There's no such thing as points in French. You talk in words, right? and so just the way that English argumentation is built, it's like everything is a bullet point kind of thing. But that's not like French culture. And so that's, I guess, what I mean is that you need to be a lot clearer and just say what you have to say. And if I was writing in France, there would be even more, fla possible. Quebec is still a North American society, but there is that those different standards that you're held up to that I find you need to adjust to that as well.
I'm interested in the difference between columns and op-eds, like you mentioned. I feel like we don't talk too much about it in school. And I mean, I've dabbled like a bit in opinion writing for the student media, but even I don't know what I would call that. I don't know what those articles would fall into. I don't know how I guess it would depend on your audience and your subject, but like when to use your own opinion, when to use research,
Yeah.
how much goes into what, anything, anything
Yeah.
you learn about opinion writing.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's just the subjectivity of it. If you are writing an op-ed versus when you're writing a regular column, when you're writing a regular column, you know you have space the next week and the next week and the next week. So psychologically, you're not going to write the same way. It's not like you need to get everything out now and that's it, you know? So op-ed writing tends to be more dense and more like, I want to say this and this and this and that. As in like, when you're a columnist, it's also about trying to develop a relationship with your readers. And so that's why it's a genre that's harder to define, because you have a lot of columnists who are not necessarily like, if you're doing, I don't know, political column per se, maybe that's going to read more similarly to an op-ed, but you will have columnists that say things that's like, it almost feels like they're journals, right? It's like, and why you would never have an op-ed that's written like that published, because who cares, right? But there's also like a media, like a personality cult thing, where people feel like, I want to hear about the thoughts of that person, and then the person is just like musing about stuff, which is a place that you can go to when you have a regular space in the media, would it be a newspaper or a magazine. As when you're an op-ed, oftentimes as well, op-eds are written by people who are not journalists, they're experts in one field and they're trying to get their opinion out. So it's a lot of, it's more dance, and it's more like, here are the facts and here's what I think and here's why. And when you're, I guess, and in between, you're someone who could be a columnist eventually, but you're just doing, you're a freelance journalist who's just pitching op-eds, basically, you're trying to get paid for it. Then usually as well, you're trying to pitch it in a way that you will say, why is it that you're relevant? You know, why is your voice, like, why do you know your stuff? Why is it that the editor should take your pitch, right? And so because of that, there's more of a, here's my expertise, here is what I found that is novel. As you know, when you know that you're going to have space every single week or on a regular basis, there's more of a, yeah, you can write about whatever, you know, and you're forced to write about whatever, because in a way, the news cycle changes fast and you don't know about everything, right? And so it's about, you develop, even if you're a generalist columnist, you don't necessarily have a beat. So I can write about anything. And I'm also never told to write about one specific thing. Like people find out what I've written about when I send them my text. And then they edit it and they publish it. There's not that level of control. So I can really go wherever. And then if it will happen sometimes that there's something specific in the news that's more related to my area of expertise, and they will say, hey, could you do, bonjour Francine, that they will do, that I'm going to be asked to do an extra text on that, but that's on top of just me being free to write about whatever. So I'd say those are the main differences that I see. But it's just like, you feel so much, I feel like you feel more pressure and less pressure in a way. There's less pressure to trying to say everything that exists under the sun when you know that you have a regular space, but also there's more pressure because you need to be relevant every week and have a thing to say that you have something, you know, new and informative and original to contribute to the public sphere, you know, every week, and that's an additional pressure as well. I guess that's the way that I would, say that.
Would sorry, someone just walked in. Would you, for pitching to editors, or would you have any specific advice for pitching op-eds or opinion or even column writing? Is it different than other kinds of pitching to magazines?
To magazines, It really depends on the magazine, and depends on who you are as well. The thing is, you can always pitch stuff to people. It's just hard to get, first of all, paid for it, and for them to understand that you're like a professional, you're freelance, and that like this is like you're trying to do this. Um, so yeah. So sorry, can you just rephrase maybe your question a little bit so I know more like
I was
what
just
you.
wondering if there was a different, is there a different way to sell yourself when you're pitching an opinion piece as opposed to something more newsy? Like
Yeah.
how would you
Well,
convince people that you're the you're the
yeah.
you write it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you have a column, right, you don't pitch, you have it. As so that's why I guess my brain is struggling a bit with your question, because there's no difference between the pitch, because there's one that involves pitches and one that doesn't.
Mhm.
Um, it's just like if you're a private citizen and you're gonna submit an op-ed, usually you just submit it and then they take it or they don't. And if they don't take it and are kind enough to let you know that they've not taken it, then you can submit it to other publication unless until somebody says it. Otherwise, when you're freelancing, you're just trying to get people interested in your idea. So yeah, like uh, what is the idea? Why is the idea interesting? Uh, what's new about, like, what's the angle that's like new or novel that you can tell, and why are you the right person to say that story, to tell that story, basically would be like the things that you need to get in your email in a way that's very concise, because people don't have time. And then, because if you give them the piece, if you've written the whole piece already, it's like you've given away your work kind of thing. And so the thing is, getting their attention enough so that they think there's something there, and that they will be willing to actually pay you to actually flesh that out. And I mean, you can always include stuff that we've done in the past, but also people can Google you. So that's the thing as well. That's why having either a Twitter account or just like having some sort of space where your work is already out there that you can just have the link is also helpful if people, because if they're not interested in your pitch, they're not going to go to the stage of here's are the things that I've done before, right? So it's just like you get them interested, and then if they want to know who is this person, then they're gonna check it out. But that's more like a second step if you've gone to the first step of being vetted for having something interesting to say. But I'm also very privileged. I've had magazine reach out to me rather than the other way around a lot of the time. But that's because of, yeah, I'm an odd creature. But I know that, for example, I'd like to write more in English-speaking magazine. I've done French, Le Devoir, Nouveau Projet, Châtelaine as well. But yeah, I think there would be something about venturing in English magazine pieces, because you have so much more space and you can develop a thought in a way that you cannot in a newspaper. But in order to do that, you need to, yeah, have that story ready. That's a really good question, by the way. Thank you for asking.
Emilie, I'm also wondering if you could speak on, you just said how for op-eds you feel like, for op-ed writing you feel the need to kind of get everything out, whereas column writing you have a place in the paper for the next day, the next week, so you kind of could save your thoughts. But how would you say your column writing would differ from, let's say, if you have an op-ed freelance, like when you're writing a column piece on a topic, do you kind of save what you're going to say and kind of bleed
Yeah,
next week, or do you give it all out?
it's not that you say what you're going to say, is that I feel like there is less pressure to feel like, I think there's a psychological pressure when you feel like this might be the only shot you get to say everything, which is a psychological pressure, for example, spokesperson, because as I was telling you, like I've done both. Like when you're a spokesperson, you're giving a media interview, it's like you have your key messages, that you need to get out, and you need to get them out now and use every like interview that you get as an opportunity to get your key messages out. If you participate on the same show, but you're there as like a panelist, just commenting, your brain doesn't work that way anymore. You're not like, when a question is asked of you, you're just trying to answer the question as best as possible and give as much insight as possible. So there's not a sense of like, here's the things that I need to say and I've said it all. As more as, here are the things that I think I can say about that. But there's not, at least my brain doesn't function in a way that's like, I'm trying to say everything under the sun about that. And that's the only thing. So for example, I'm asked a lot to comment on issues that have to do with race a lot of times. If I have a column, I feel like I can write about that. A week I can have this one notion. If I was still, when you see people who are part of civil society that are writing, you feel sometimes that they're trying to get like their whole message out in one text, and it makes for writing that is more dense, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's more like a psychological disposition that I'm talking about, more than you're not necessarily going to hold. For example, I was saying this afternoon, I might write about the whole debate we're having in Canada about recognizing what's happening in China, the Uyghur genocide and all of that. This is, when you're writing this as a columnist, you're trying to make interesting points. If you're writing it as an op-ed, you're also trying to get interesting point, but there's like, probably you're going to be a professor or somebody who has specific expertise in that, or you will have to, have done some research to be the person that gets to write about that, because it's like, why you. And so I guess that's the difference that I'm trying to make.
I'm also wondering if you could speak on, I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in with any questions, but so for your column pieces, when you have a topic, like how do you approach it? When you have your idea, you have your position, how do you kind of break it down and say, okay, this is how the lead is going to be, this is what I'm going to do? How do you approach any topic that you're going to have a column on?
That's a really good question. And I'm also super curious to hear Francine's answer. I don't know if she wants to jump in after me, because I feel like this is there's no method that works for everyone. It's like everyone's brain is different. So my answer is more going to be how my brain works. And I'm really curious to hear more about how Francine's brain works. But I think, how do I approach a topic? I feel like it's very much guts feeling-y. There's something out there that I feel like something needs to be said about it. I think that's how my brain works, is that I'm seeing things and I'm like, there's this point that needs to be made, so I'm gonna make it. It's like I feel like I'm listening to the silence more than what's being said. I'm listening to the public conversations, and I'm waiting to hear either the taboos or just the angles that I feel like we're not getting there, but we should go there. I'm trying to identify elephants in the room. And I think once I've done that, like the rest is gonna write itself. But it's just, I need to have that kind of like, we're all talking about this, but like this, oftentimes this is how my brain works. And one of the things that I've, it depends how busy I am, and with COVID it's harder as well to do like field work. But if it's something that I feel I've actually never done this on purpose, but I just realized over time that in the last couple of, just a little bit more than 2 years, whenever I've interviewed people for columns, I think I've only interviewed one man. It's really not on purpose at all. And then I just realized I tend to want to give Mike women, and for especially when it's like things that are outside of my area of expertise. And I know that there is lack of representation. And the reason I became a columnist was one of the reasons, as I was telling you, is I was just so frustrated to have those debates, about me without me kind of thing. And so I feel like I'm just trying to not reproduce that. And so I feel like there are people who are out there who would have more interesting things to say about a specific thing than me. I feel like I will tend to do interviews and let their voice a little bit take over my own piece. But this is a genre that is so open and hard to define, that is so personal, and like everybody does it differently. And I feel like I'm still struggling to find what is my style. And every week I try things out that are different. And it's like, oh, that works. Oh, I like that. Oh, I didn't like that. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot is, for example, how much we talk about youth all the time as if they're not reading the newspaper. I'm like, what is this? Like, cannot Gen Z read Le Devoir? Can they not like also read the Gazette? So how do I not reproduce that erasure and like sometimes write in a way that teenagers will want to write it? And it worked, like I've done a couple of those exercises in the last couple of weeks. It worked really well. You have teachers like using my text in their classes and then discussing it. And I'm like, first of all, it might be really good to get them, involved in more in the news cycle and like read newspaper when they, either now or when they get older. But it's also a conversation about who you're trying to bring into those mainstream media, like whose voice is missing and that, And I also think that people always, put me in a box. So like, you're supposed to write about this and this and that. And I actually, when you look at my actual columns, I write about a whole bunch of things. It's just that the columns that get noticed the most are the ones that are about certain topics. But I think I make a point as well of writing about, and especially because I do more television now, that I'm asked to, just do research about any national political affair of the day. It gets my brain working about all those economic issues, whatever. I was just doing a 1 hour special yesterday about the bilateral meeting between Joe Biden and Trudeau. So like, I know that file now. I would not if I had done my show in the same way, right? In the same level of details, and I can use that. But always trying to bring your own voice and your own perspective into any topic that you might approach, instead of just being pigeonholed into a certain beat and being like, that's the only thing you're going to write about. So yeah, that was an answer that went kind of all over the place. But Francine, how do you approach your columns? You're on mute. You're still on mute. Francine, you're muted.
Francine, you're on mute.
Sorry. I always do this. Okay. Well, two ways, especially main ways. And one of them, Emilie, you already touched upon. I really, really ask myself, what can I say that hasn't been said already?
That's right. Yeah.
Because God knows there is so much commentary, and the mainstream media is très avide, really is looking for commentary, because they're in competition with the social networks, right? And there's so many people saying the same thing on the same subject every week, which kind of discourages me, because so I think you have to ask yourself, what can I bring to the table that hasn't already been here, and two, of course, that often for Emilie, like for me, often brings us back to the pigeonhole, because she, like me, got our place in the mainstream media for specific reasons. For me, it was women. For her, it was race, and so we are always being pigeonholed there. And of course, we are probably the people you do want to listen to on those questions, because we have thought about it more than most, So the other thing is, I don't want to always talk about the same thing or go where they think they're going. The people are waiting for me to go. That's my. So those are my two main challenges. Not to say just repeat in a different way with my style or whatever, what other people are saying, and then try and not all, like show that there's that we actually have thought about a lot of more things than people think we think about, as
Yeah,
already pointed out,
absolutely.
and we don't get credit for it, but
Mhm.
that much. Maybe Emilie's doing good on that front, but voilà,
Yeah, it's a struggle.
it's a struggle.
I was wondering if you could also speak on, you just mentioned how, you were off Twitter for a while because of all the backlash you were getting for certain people. And I'm wondering, you even mentioned, obviously the standards are high for columnists and op-ed writers, but even more so, you're a Black woman. So can you talk about how, the standards are much higher for you, therefore you're getting more criticism. How do you deal with all this?
Right. So first of all, the Twitter thing, just to, I get a lot of people ever since I started at Le Devoir who write to Brian Miles every day, asking him to fire me, like every day. And then sometimes it's just me alone. Sometimes it's like Emily and Francine and Aurélie together are like the axis of evil. And then so it's like usually those three. Jean-François is very much on the left as well, but like he's a white man, so he doesn't get harassed as much. But like it's us three. And so yeah, so Brian Ma, who's a director, is very much aware of it because he gets tagged on those things and he receives the mail all the time. And so I think that was just one attempt of that ended up working. Basically, the strategy was to mass report as many of my tweets as possible to get my account suspended. I know that because people were sharing screenshots of here is how many tweets of Emilie Nicolas just reported, and then encouraging others to do the same. So it's not subtle at all. They were doing it on Twitter, and also, there were some Facebook groups where people were mobilizing to do that. I don't know that anything specific triggered it because it's not this first time that people try, it's just the first time that they succeed. They succeeded because algorithms are stupid. AI doesn't understand sarcasm and doesn't understand satire, and that gets a lot of other folks, other than me, banned as well. When that happened, I realized that Marlene Jennings, who's like the first Black woman ever from Quebec to be an MP, also is like her account got suspended and now she's still suspended. There's also some people who reached out to me who had their Instagram account suspended. Usually it's a lot of LGBTQ youth who talk about certain topics that the algorithm doesn't make a difference between, like sex and sex. Basically, it's a lot of trying to ban women's bodies as well. So people who are like body positive as well will get their accounts banned by IG a lot. So there's a whole bunch of different stuff happening that I'm actually working on a Canada Line episode on that actually. So I'm trying to reach out to a couple of folks and get them on the mic to try to figure out what's up with Twitter. But yeah, so there's that. But that's just like, it took both the director of Le Devoir and the director of the Gazette together writing to the head of communication of Twitter Canada to get me unblocked, which is a lot. And that's not going to happen with a lot of folks, right? So there's a issue there in terms of public speaking and just freedom, liberty of expression. There are definitely freedom of expression there for sure. So that's why I'm trying to dig. It's like, if that's not the right way to solve an issue, like if you have to have this kind of contact for the issue to get solved, the issue is not solved. Although I'm personally glad that I'm back on Twitter. But that's just basically the latest iteration of just, yeah, people coming at me for all sorts of reasons. And I'm happy that there's more and more testimonials as well of things like that popping out. I just saw Carla Beauvais, who was a columnist with Le Journal Métro, also come out in El Québec in terms of why she stopped to write her column and how she was basically harassed for some of the things she said. about the Buy Black movement and how, you know, that triggered so many reactions. She didn't name them, but this is a safe space. So Québécois like really attacked her on that, and that, you know, their fans then like go into things that look like death threat and even calling the police. And so, and I've had that issue as well. There are some people, columnists on that side, that they won't criticize your idea, they criticize you and your identity by sharing your picture as well. And then their fans will send you death threats, they will send you rape threats, they will send you, you know, a lot of other insults. And so I've had to block, you know, it's like, it's weird when we talk about, you know, the state of the public sphere in Quebec, for if you're for your columnist and for your own personal safety, you need to block columnists from a competing newspaper. I think it says a lot about like the state of affair in this beautiful province. And so yeah, most of the time that hate is, sometimes it's just organic, but a lot of the time it's like a person with a big profile who says things that are dishonest, and then their fans will like massively come into your inbox. And sometimes it's just writing columns about very sensitive topic like Bill 21 or, you know, things like that. We'll also do it. Writing about the police would also do it. And another thing that I'm, you know, looking at, and I just had actually constant this conversation with Marie-André, is that there's like, I just saw the people who, you know, it's really hard to do a complaint at the Conseil de Presse against columnists because we don't have to be balanced, right? It's only if the information is inaccurate. So I've looked at like the basically the archive of who got complained in the Conseil de Presse. I got 2 in the last years for stuff that were stupid, you know, and then they're not gonna go ahead, but you still have to defend yourself. And then the other person before me was Fabrice. And then before that, you went all the way to like 27 or something. There's like, we're the only people that got complaints. And then you got them too. So there's very few of them, but if you look at like the overrepresentation of who gets them, I'm sure Francine would get them as well, but it's like, what is the line between like this body being there as a body of accountability that's really important to make sure that we have journalism of quality, and how much of that is just people doing the journalism equivalent of calling 911 because they see someone with a hoodie on the street and they think that person is suspicious, right? So there's that as well happening. If Carla Beauvais got a complaint to the police because she was supposedly, you know, spreading racial hatred because she was writing a column, like that's abusive as well. So I'm used to being followed when I get into a store that is fancy by, you know, like the staff there who's thinking she might steal something. Could you, you know, let your bag at the door kind of thing. But it caught me by surprise, which it shouldn't have, that there's basically the equivalent of that as well in the public sphere, which is not to say that you don't need to have those bodies in place. That's not what I'm saying at all, but just like emergency services can be abused by people with biases, those as well, there's a whole bunch of complaints that happen just because they don't like women, or they don't like feminists, or they don't like this, or they don't like that. And then you need to fight that back. And then if you have that level of over surveillance, well, one day you're gonna make a mistake, and that mistake will, you know, be caught because you have this level of people waking up at night to hate you kind of thing. So yeah, so that's what I meant by like you're held to different standards, not necessarily by my, you know, I feel like I do have the support of my team and I'm really grateful for them. It's not that, it's just like the level of public attention when you're saying things that some people don't like, make it that it's like you feel like you cannot, people are waiting for you to trip. And so you need to really have that in mind and really, you know, overthink everything you're going to do that's public. I'm sorry if that discourages students. I'm just being real honest here. And I think it's good that you know and that you know what you're getting as yourself into. When I first started as a columnist, one thing I said was like, I think Marie-André Chouinard asked me, you know, you might get a lot of hatred. How are you going to deal with that? And I was like, by understanding that this is going to be a war zone, and if it ends up being better than this, then good, but not be caught by surprise by the level of, you know, vitriol that you might get. And so if you're ready for it and you're also building your mental health routine accordingly, getting space, like, because if it was a physical tough job, you would get physical training and go to the gym regularly to be able to do the physical tough job. But this is a mentally tough job, being in the public sphere with my identity, with the kind of messages that I bring in 2021. So you need to have the same kind of like mental health training that you would do if it was a physically tough job. That's the only way that I think you can do it.
And I'm wondering, Emilie, you know, you obviously spoke on it's such an interesting and complex topic, but you're obviously a very established columnist and op-ed writer and commentary journalist, but a lot of these students here right now aren't. So what advice would you give to them? Let's say if today they wanted to pitch to the Montreal Gazette or Le Devoir and they had an opinion, they had a good story, what would you suggest to the students that are here today that would want to do that?
It's funny you call me very established because I feel like a baby columnist. Like Francine is very established. I'm just starting, but I know. Although I know what you're trying to say as well, and I'd say be someone and do things other than just being a journalist student. You know, it's like have your things that you're good at and you're interested in and you're involved in society, other than just, you know, this is my diploma. I think especially with opinion writing, it's a lot about trying to get a specific voice out there, and people are looking for diversity of voices. But but that voice and those diversity of perspective, like you need to have had that trajectory that gives you a perspective, right? And so, and I'm sure all of you guys have it, but it's just like, do the thing that make you, you know, and like Hassan comes from the feminist movement, and like other people come from different, you know, whatever it is that you like, or that you, if you want to write about, you know, the environment, then, you know, maybe, you know, do something about that. And which is hard, because if you're going to be like a reporter at first, it's like there's a lot of discouragement against actually social engagement. But if you're going to trying to reach for opinion writing first, actually this kind of profile might help. So it's a tricky thing, and it really depends on the philosophy of the newspaper you're trying to work with. If you're, you know, the Toronto Star loves people with profiles like that, that's in the DNA of the Toronto Star. But the Globe and Mail is not like that at all, right? And so it really depends what if you're trying to pitch for the Taillis, the Taillis will love a person who's like been doing some stuff around like LGBTQ rights and then actually is a journalism student. And like, that's a great way to start, you know, raising a profile and do op-ed there. And then once you've published there, you can like go into those other publications that are a little bit more traditional in terms of what kind of profile they're looking for. But yeah, it's like getting that foot in the door thing, because once you've done it, I guess it's like your own work speaks for yourself. Like if you're a good writer and you're interesting, then more people will want to work for you, but it's getting that first foot in the door that's hard. But what worked for me is like all the other things that were unpaid volunteer work that made me interesting. And that is what makes people want to hear from me about stuff, I think. And so yeah, if I was the kind of person that was just focused on getting the things I was supposed to do, first of all, I would have been an academic instead. But I also think I'm in the right place, because I feel like in this day and age, there is so much really pressing issues. And I feel like my brain wanted to be in the heart of the action, because I feel like that's where you need to be. That's where I need to be, like, to be helpful. And so yeah, but in order to do that, I guess you need to, have something that makes you interesting and special, you know, more than having good grades and having done, you know, the basic stuff. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Does anyone have other questions, or maybe you want to run an idea by Emilie to maybe she could help you brainstorm how to kind of format it, or if you're even interested in pitching a certain publications, how she would suggest to approach it.
Oh, sorry, just before we go into that, one last note that is interesting, because Francine, you mentioned being pigeonholed. And I know you're bilingual as well, but one thing that I find interesting is because, yeah, I used to live in Toronto as well, and I'm like, we're both, I guess, in between both provinces, and there's something about that makes you as well pigeonholed in a way that's different. When I work, for example, with CBC and other, I'm just like the Quebec person on those panels that are like, there's going to have a Prairie person, an Ontario person, and then the Quebec person. And so I'm the expert on Quebec then. And then my accent becomes an advantage because it means like I know my stuff about Quebec. And so it's like, and I find it really interesting because it's like when you work in French, it's like I'm like, I talk about this and people want to hear me because of this. But then if I work in English, I just like speak for all of Quebec, which is amazing. It's freeing in a way. And so even the things in which you're pigeonholed, it depends on context, I guess is my point there. And yeah, and if you're working in different contexts, then that gives you wiggle room.
I had one last question about I suppose it's kind of along the lines of getting pigeonholed, but even before that, is it not advisable, or does it not matter for someone who does want to do news to start writing or start trying to write columns right out of journalism school? Like, is there any circumstance where it's bad to have put all your opinions out there before you're established enough as someone who can do regular news well?
Yeah.
Can you do both, I guess?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to ask this question to, because I have such a like out of the box trajectory. I don't know, Francine, if you have an opinion about that, but it really depends who you work for.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously the mainstream media does not, column writing is what you ascend to when you've done all your previous, you've proven that you've been a loyal subject and a good journalist and an objective one, and then you don't become they don't hire young people to become columnists. They give that, it's a benediction, it's an award given to the good soldiers sort of thing. So it's true that mainstream media still has this bee in its bonnet that like good journalism is objective journalism. So it would, if you had been if you've been out there airing your opinions or writing columns, they probably wouldn't hire you as a column writer right away. I mean, you'd have to do all the rest before, but maybe today, because of the competition with social media. So it's a question of if column writing is what you want to do, is how you do it. I mean, there are alternative media now, and there's social media. So there's all kinds of ways of doing it. You don't have to go through mainstream media, but if you're hoping to be employed by mainstream media and hoping to be a columnist, don't put that in quite in the same breath right away. Like they'll make you do other things before you get to the column, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's why I'm the exception that confirms the rule kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Aurélie as well. And it's this thing where I feel like that's how newspaper work. You're absolutely right. But when you do that, you have like no person under the age of 40 that is a columnist. So people are trying to like find ways around that. Because people want something different. And then this rule of objectivity is so hard on a lot of reporters that have underrepresented background because they're trying to bring their own perspective. And so if you're going to wait for people to survive the objectivity rule, for BIPOC to survive the objectivity rule before giving them columns, you're going to wait a really, really long time because a lot of them like tend to drop out before that. And I know that it's been the same. I've been doing work consulting with the CBC actually around those issues, and I've heard from a lot of like senior women as well in position of power there that says that basically used to be the same with women. It's like the kind of journalism, for example, that we've had around Me Too, it would have been impossible to do even a couple of years back because all the women journalists who would have been digging that issue would have been said to be not objective enough because they were themselves women or themselves survivors, therefore unable to do this journalism in a way that would be balanced. And so that's like a lot of people who have other identities now, Indigenous writers, Black writers, definitely trans writers, like queer writers. It's like it's really hard to survive with that rule in place or that perspective in place, because trying to have a point of view that or write in a way that's balanced, it's very different from objectivity as a construct. And what that means, which is you need to be like from the middle class and think like a person from the middle class is what objectivity means, basically, in my opinion. And so like if you're not that, you need to either pretend that you're that, you always have a chip on your shoulder, like always have to prove yourself that you can do that. And so for you to be the right fit and for your news organization to like you enough to the point that they're going to reward you with this position, I feel like that's why most of the people that you see that are not like, younger or not white or, young women, feminists, like usually they don't have that trajectory. If they have a column, they've done other things and like they've bent the rules to make them, because that trajectory is so hard for people to survive in if you're not. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm just saying it's harder, and that's why I think like people who have this kind of profile are trying to exactly as Hansen was saying, like use non-traditional media, do podcasting instead, go to places like the Tai or New Magazines, or there's a lot of them in the States as well that are run by foundations, and there's just a whole lot of non-traditional media in there. And so if the traditional media want to keep up with that, they need to figure out other ways to access the columnist spot, because otherwise the change is going to be way too slow for the changes that are happening in society.
But just to clarify a point, Katie, I was talking a minute ago about people who want to be part, like employees, salaried employees of mainstream media. Neither Emilie nor I are salaried employees. So that's a bit different. Like I was describing, if you get hired by the Montreal Gazette tomorrow, you won't be a columnist the day after. But they might, if you might become, as we did, you might be lucky enough to push through and be a columnist as a contributor. That's what we are, contributors. But then, and Emilie spoke about this a moment ago, you need to have a badge of you have to have proven that you represent a specific voice, because there's so many voices. They already have their own newsroom, and all the people who want to become columnists anyway. So they're going to go and give those spots to people who have, they're always looking for different voices that represent a part of the readership that they're not, getting to enough. And that's where Emilie says, like,
be someone.
Have your own thing. Have your own thing. Environment is a big. Women are still big, and the racial question is Indigenous. All of those are specific voices that the mainstream media is really hungry for. So if you can find that, yes, you have a chance as an outsider. We are outsiders. They like to say that we're part of the family, but there's a difference between the people that, the people reading don't make a difference between contributors and people inside, but there is a difference. So I just wanted to make that.
And that difference is part of your paycheck, by the way. So you need to be someone as also, because otherwise you're not going to be able to make rent. So you need to have like those other things going on for you, because that's not how you make a living. Like, or you need to have a gazillion gigs like I do now to be able to, like, you have to like add all the small peanuts together to be able to make a bag of peanuts that is enough. Um, and so, yeah, that's part of like the structural inequalities, right? As well, is that the people who have those diverse profiles are less paid. If you look at like the media, yeah, industry, it's just because of, exactly because of the things that we just, it's not meant to be that way, but the result is that.
Well, I gotta get going to a class, but thank you so much for this. This was super helpful.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Take care, everyone.
Emilie, I was wondering if also you could speak on, I think Anne-Sophie kind of mentioned it with the Anglophone and Francophone kind of voices, but I'm wondering for someone, I believe she's also bilingual, if she wants to kind of write in like from a Francophone perspective, but in an English publication, or an Anglophone perspective in a Francophone, do you think that is something also that diversifies you? An advantage?
In a way, for sure. I think it's interesting that I read in the Gazette, right? I'm like this francophone from Levy, who writes in the Gazette. So, and I think they've been hiring actually a little bit more more francophone writers as freelancers, but still, to try and get that perspective into the newspaper. And so it goes back to what I was saying, but what makes you special changes depending on context. So, like, what makes me something that they didn't have in the Gazette is different than what makes me something that they didn't have in the Devoir. Or when I write work in Ontario, it's also something different as well. But yeah, that's simply a way to do it. But it's not necessarily just the bilingualism. I think what really helps me is more like the biculturalism, especially when you're trying to explain Quebec to the rest of the country. Not the Montreal Gazette. Like here, people are speak English, but they're Quebecers. I'm really not talking about that. I'm speaking about like talking about Quebec politics to people who might not get Quebec at all. You need to speak in a different way as well. You're gonna, just like if I was to write for an international publication, you need to have in your writing in there a lot of like Canada 101 that you would never write if you write for a Canadian publication. So it changes as well your style of writing. And if you're doing that orally, it changes the way you're going to speak as well. Because when you speak to a Quebec audience, there's stuff that you take for granted. And there's also things that you don't need to say because like you assume that the public all cares about this because they care about the place, right? Find it when I work with media that have an audience that might want to use me as a way to confirm their prejudice, you're more careful about what you say. But what's interesting for me is that regardless of where I work, I'm in this role of translation between minority and majority. So I do it within Quebec, and then it's really easy, I guess, for me to do the same between Francophones and the rest of the country, because that's already what I do, regardless of where I am. It's like, there's this little people over there that you don't hear from directly because of who you read. And here's me trying to be the cultural translator. So whether it's me talking to folks in Toronto or in Calgary, or it's just me, talking about majority minorities that I make in Quebec, I guess that there's nowhere that I can go that I can avoid this role or not being that person. But yeah, I think it's not just the bilingualism. To like answer the question finally, it's like the knowing the country. It's the knowing, and not just the Ottawa bubble. I think that's what maybe makes me different than a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks who are, working in French here who like surveil Ottawa politics. They understand the Ottawa politics, but they don't know the country, and they don't know or they don't know the country outside of Ontario, or like, and I think that's going to influence as well how you read and how you're going to translate what's going on, how you're going to analyze the topics. And so yeah, beyond language, I think it's about like culture, and like this place is so complex, and just like the West is a whole other ballpark. And the Maritimes as well. So it's just like trying to have contacts and know the place, rather than just be able to speak English or know the Ottawa bubble. I think matters. At least it matters to me. Yeah.
Does anyone else have other questions or even ideas they want to run by Emilie? You know, she's here right now. You should take advantage.
Yeah. I don't know, Victoria or Olivier, if you're still with us, if you have any questions. Yes, Joelle?
Hi. I'm really just starting in my career. So I'm in my first year and I'm really interested in doing opinions and more like commentary journalism. But because I'm so early into my career, I'm just wondering, you know, if I take like a very strong approach on certain subjects, like how could that affect my career, like in the long term? Like if ever, like when I'm out of J school, like if I'm trying to look for a job, like I know it, like it's an opinion, so obviously you have to give your opinion, but like how could I work around, you know, not being scared of like not being able to find a job because of my opinions? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And yeah, once again, we're like not the right person to answer this question. I just think you need to, I'm going to give a general life advice that has nothing to do with journalism specifically. I find that the more vocal I am about who I am, the happier I am, because the people who don't want to deal with that just don't contact me anymore. So I only get contacted by people who like want to work with me, and they have an idea of who I am that's out there already. It's all Googleable. So if they reach out to me, it's because they want it. And if they don't reach out to me, it's because they don't want it. And I'm seeing a lot of young people, especially young women, getting a lot of like workplace abuse by people just yeah. In journalism can be newsroom culture that is difficult, but just in general, even in nonprofit, you see a lot of folks who, you know, you don't want to show your cards too much because you want to get hired, but then that gets you into places that are actually super uncomfortable for you and that you're not even happy in. And so I think that's something to balance. It's like, if you have to hide a part of who you are to be able to make it into a place, is that place even that great? Which I think is hard to think about when you're just struggling financially and you just want to put bread on the table. But I think, you know, depending on your financial situation and what you actually want to do, I think that's something to think about, that a lot of people have to weigh it. Sometimes it's like you're going to just do it for a couple of years to get the experience, and that it gets you into a place that's more like what you want to do, and you can have it with that mindset. But just, and that's true with relationship as well, like the more you are very clear about who you are, the more there's this filter that happens, is that the people who are not a good match for you are not even going to approach you. Like the more loud feminist you are, the more like men are just self-triaging in my way, and that saves me a lot of energy, right? And so, and there's that as well. I find with workplaces, if people are not about me, then they're not about me, and I don't even have to try to make it work and then realize that it's not about me because of how loud I am. That's not a strategy that works for everybody, but I just think that's something to consider. If that's something that like weights on your mind, it's like how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice, you know, to be able to make it into a workplace.
Thank you. That's really good advice.
I'm like super impractical too, and a dreamer, so whatever works for you. Olivier says, I have to leave, but thank you. Okay, and then Victoria says, thank you as well. She has to leave for class. So I guess that's pretty much it, unless you guys have other questions or things that you want to ask to me, or I'm absolutely not feeling guilty about putting Francine on the spot either. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Francine questions like, how are you doing? And how do you survive as a columnist? Because that's the thing, right? We never that's the thing about being staff versus freelancer, is like you're all freelancing in the same newspaper, but we actually don't ever get to interact at all. I think it's something for people to understand, that we never, unless it's something like this happens, is like there's no way of figuring out what's up in your own newsroom. You're just working from home, sending a text in a Google Doc, and then it gets edited, and then it gets printed, and then that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do you survive as a
columnist? First of all, let me say that I am actually quite aghast at hearing how much abuse you're getting. I mean, we all get it, but like c'est dégueulasse, you know. But just for those of you who want to make a career in column writing, I mean, I think I've always said, and I still believe this, it's a real privilege to be able to give your opinion, even if you're really badly paid, as we are, Emilie and I, and that you have to multiply all this stuff to try and make a living. And I'm rather tired of trying to, scrape by after all these years. But I must say that it gets a little, it's not a great period right now. So that might have something to do with, I don't want to discourage anyone, but it's hard to maintain. I mean, as much as I totally am of the school of Emilie, follow your heart, know what you want and follow that. I think it's important. And the clearer you are about what interests you and what your values and principles are, the better it will be. But it gets tiring. It gets tiring to put your head on the log, as we say, la tête sur le bio every week. And not to mention the abuse that comes with it. I'm not sure how Emilie, how she can deal with that all the time. I just don't read the. I just don't read.
Don't read the comments.
Don't read the stuff.
Don't read the comments.
It's difficult to remain true to what you feel is something you want to do, and you feel that you might have a good reason to do it. It's hard to maintain like day in and day out, especially as a freelancer. I find because we've got the support, but it's not. You don't feel like they've got your back to a certain extent, but not completely. I know every day that I'm expendable, and I think the older you get, and being a woman, and the older you get, the more you have that sense of vulnerability. Mm. But I still think that should not discourage anyone. But I think there's a lot of. I mean, if journalism is really what you want to do, I think it's important to try and figure out how you want to do it, and in what context, sort of thing. But it's demanding work. It's also, it can be also very gratifying work, because as I say, people are reading your opinion, and you're part of the public debate. You're part of the people that are flogging people's minds so that people will think about things. And I think that's a big responsibility, and a mission that a lot of people should have. But it can be there are days when you feel, oh my God, do I need this? Mm-hmm. Voilà.
Yeah. I think dangerous is that on those days, you can self-censor. Actually, it's just like you wish you could say something, and then you're like, if I say that, I'm going to take this amount of abuse, and not today, Satan, not today, And then when you start thinking like that, your writing gets more bland. And that's the danger, is that like you still have you haven't been canceled. It's just like you're like self editing in a way that is not about being careful. Like you're just like not trying to go certain places. If you go, if you know that you cannot write about certain things as well without getting formal complaints, and like, and then that's not just columnists. I think a lot of reporters. There's certain topics in Canada, and we know the list, that there is absolutely no way to talk about those issues without getting a formal complaints to the ombudsman or whatever. And that's just a lot of paperwork that a lot of people just don't want to deal with. And so some stories die because of that. And then the legal advice of like, yeah, maybe, and so to stay courageous in this environment, you need to like have energy. And I think it's hard in 2020, it's 2021 to have that energy all the time. But yeah, I admire you for having been, up and doing it for so long. It's and the work conditions that we're in, it takes a lot of dedication, and you need to really love your job. If you're not if you're not loving it, you're not gonna. For me, it's the writing. I love writing so much. And when I was in movement organizing, I worked with people more, and I'm actually quite introverted, and it would exhaust me all the time. I love people one at a time in small numbers. But like working from home with Google Doc is actually for me a really good thing. And if that's your idea of a social prison, then maybe you're not going to be like loving your work as a columnist, because that's the daily reality of it. Is a very lonely work. So you need to be a loner in a way, I think. Otherwise you're going to do, it's not going to be your main gig. You're going to do more like television, radio, whatever, and then write a column once in a while. But if you love writing, and you're this kind of introverted loner who loves words, then you're gonna love just not the public visibility of it, but just the act of putting an opinion on paper is going to be something that you love.